The morning of March 2025, the first sunlight pierced through the thick fog on Jordan-Hare Stadium, a place that had witnessed immortal seasons of glory. There, Tommy Tuberville, 71 years old, once called the coach of the South, stood alone on the wet grass. For over 40 years, he had climbed every rung of the college football ladder, from the modest locker rooms of Arkansas State to the SEC throne with the Auburn Tigers. In 2004, his team went undefeated, 13-0, defeating Alabama 6 years in a row, a feat no one has replicated. The players he coached later became coaches, entrepreneurs, and good fathers. In the world of sports, the name Tuberville was synonymous with discipline and loyalty. When he left the field, he wrote a new chapter, winning the 2020 Senate election, becoming Alabama's voice, bringing the coach spirit to politics, where he still spoke of teamwork, discipline, and trust. That journey, to others, was a symbol of the American success story, a son of humble Arkansas roots rising to the pinnacle of fame. But when the stadium lights dimmed, all that remained was the cold wind whistling through the empty stands. Under the gray light of dawn, he looked around, feeling the unmistakable void, the years of criticism, misunderstanding, the nights alone in his Washington office after colleagues had gone home. He had been hurt by the very things he believed in, seen as stubborn, isolated from friends, yet never fallen. The back pain with every step reminded him that time spares no one, but his eyes still shone, resolute as the day he first stepped onto the practice field. "A real man isn't afraid to be hated," he once said. For deep down, he knew discipline and faith. Those were the two things that kept him standing tall his entire life. Camden, Arkansas, a small, forgotten town amidst cornfields and weathered rooftops. Summers here were swelteringly unbearable, winters damp and mournful like an endless ballad. In a wooden house tucked by the road, Tommy Tuberville grew up with the sound of AM radio broadcasting war updates and the click of his father's lighter. Charles R. Tuberville, Jr., a World War II veteran, awarded the Purple Heart and Bronze Star. But those gleaming medals couldn't dispel the darkness within him. Charles never said, "I love you." He taught with his eyes, his silence, his discipline. When Tommy messed up, his father didn't scold, just stared a look that made the boy tremble. His mother was kind, gentle, but always lived in fear of a sudden outburst. Sometimes dinner was cloaked in silence, only the clink of spoons on plates and the radio's hum from the living room. Tommy often glanced at his father, hoping for praise, only to hear, "Do it again." On winter nights, as wind howled through the door cracks, the boy huddled under blankets, hearing his father's coughs from the next room, wondering, "Will he ever be proud of me?" That question would haunt Tommy his whole life, like a wound that never closed. The first day Tommy stepped onto a football field, shoes too big, shoulder pads slipping, he searched for his father beyond the fence. There he stood silent, arms crossed, no clapping, no nod. The game ended. Tommy's team won. Sweaty, panting, he ran to his father, exclaiming, "Dad, did you see? I scored." His father replied curtly, "Yeah, but you could have done better." Those words were a thin, cold, sharp blade, piercing the tender heart. That night, Tommy didn't cry. He stared at the ceiling and vowed never to let anyone see him weak. To be recognized, he had to win, always. Later, Tommy said his childhood was like a boot camp, waking at 5 a.m., raking leaves, polishing shoes, folding blankets, so tight a coin could bounce off them. His father didn't teach love, only honor. He believed affection weakened men. So Tommy learned to stay silent, to endure, to smile through pain. While other kids ran to their mother's arms, Tommy stayed on the field, kicking a worn ball on gravel, straining to hear an imagined praise in the wind. Those years forged him strong, resilient, but also sealed his heart. The older he got, the more he resembled his father. Reserved, guarded, carrying a loneliness no one understood. In his first coaching notebook, the first line he wrote was, Discipline creates freedom. But deep down, he knew that discipline didn't grant freedom. It only hid his fear of being belittled. The cost of living to prove himself was never resting. Years later, as a renowned college coach, Tommy still kept his father's black and white photo in his wallet, a man in uniform, eyes distant, lips pressed tight. After every big win, he'd look at it and whisper, "I did it, Dad." But there was never a reply. Only the wind, as if his father still stood there, silent, watching. And in that silence, the tragedy began, a boy learning to be great to compensate for a hug he never received. Tommy left Camden in 1976 with an old suitcase, a few clothes, and a physical education degree from Southern Arkansas University. The two-year-old didn't know where the future would lead, only that he had to escape the heavy wooden walls where his father's silence had defined his childhood. His first job was coaching high school football in Hermitage, Arkansas, a small school with a rundown locker room, peeling concrete floors, and the smell of sweat and dirt in the air. His salary was so meager he ate instant noodles for weeks, hand-washed clothes, and slept in the coaching office. But in that poverty, he found faith. The scrawny boys on the field were just like him, kids who needed someone to believe they could be better. Each morning, he taught them how to run, defend, but most importantly, how to never give up. Years later, Tommy became an assistant coach at Arkansas State, then moved to Miami, entering the cutthroat, politically charged world of college football. There, among famous coaches, he was just that small-town coach from Arkansas, a name no one bothered to remember. He quietly stayed after practices, cleaning the field, wiping walls, stacking helmets. Once, after Miami's crushing loss, players cried in the locker room while other assistants went out for beers. Tommy stayed, gathering muddy jerseys, staring at the scattered trash, thinking, "Football is life in miniature. Winning is just temporary anesthesia. Tomorrow, we fight again." The 1,980 seconds passed like an exhausting march. He had no personal life, no family, no time. Late nights, Tommy sat alone in his Miami office, looking at his father's photo on the desk, wondering, if he were here, would he say, "Good job"? The question never found an answer. It became both his drive and his burden. In 1995, Tommy was named head coach at Ole Miss, a broken team, bottom of the SEC, mocked by media as a team without a soul. He arrived in Oxford with a few loyal assistants and a mad ambition to rebuild from ashes. In a cramped, stale paint office, he slept on a couch, lived on coffee and grit. Each night, as the stadium lights dimmed, he sat writing a coaching plan, a 40-page strategy filled with notes, diagrams, mottos, and a bold line on the first page. Asterisk. No one believes in us, but they will. Asterisk. The first season was hell, loss after loss, fans leaving mid-game. Newspapers wrote that Tuberville won't survive the fall. But he didn't quit. He started small, making players practice earlier, eat right, relearn basic techniques. He knocked on dorm doors, asking each player, "Do you still believe in yourself?" Slowly, that spirit spread like wildfire. By 1997, Ole Miss pulled off a miraculous win against LSU, one of the most improbable comebacks in team history. The stadium erupted, the crowd chanting his name. When the SEC named him Times Coach of the Year, Tommy stood on the podium, smiling but teary-eyed. In that moment, he should have been happy. But amidst the cheers, he looked to the stands and felt a void. In his mind, his father's stern face appeared, cold eyes, arms crossed. Would he be proud? The question returned, heavier than ever. That night, after the ceremony, while others partied and gave interviews, Tommy returned to his office, sitting alone under a dim yellow light. He pulled his father's photo from his wallet, placed it on the desk, stared long, and whispered, "I did it, Dad." No one heard. Only the wind slipped through the window, rustling a paper with the words, "Time's discipline creates freedom." Asterisk. He knew he'd won, but also lost something. For every peak is another valley, and for Tommy, the quest for conquest became an endless march where victory was never enough, and love, once again, remained out of reach. Auburn, Alabama, fall of 1999, Tommy Tuberville stepped onto Jordan-Hare Stadium in a deep blue suit, his eyes blazing with the fire of a man who'd found his destiny. After years sleeping in offices, enduring scorn, he was now called with reverence, Coach Tubbs. He brought his old philosophy times, discipline and heart times, to a place where legends were born and buried as fast as morning headlines. Auburn was the South's football mecca, where victory wasn't just glory, it was morality, honor, the breath of the state. Tommy understood this and bore its weight like a soldier donning armor for battle. Over the next 9 years, he built an empire. Each season was a campaign, each game a fight for survival. Under him, Auburn was reborn disciplined, fierce, ruthless, and precise in every throw. Then came 2004, the immortal season. Auburn won all, 13 games, no losses. They crushed Georgia, LSU, Tennessee, and demolished Virginia Tech in the Sugar Bowl. As fireworks exploded, players hugged and cried, but Tommy stood still, hands in pockets, eyes distant. Amid the confetti, a bitter truth crept into his heart. Despite being undefeated, Auburn was excluded from the BCS championship, a perfect team unrecognized. His voice was hoarse with the press. Sometimes, even when you do everything right, the world turns its back. Years later, they called it Tuberville's curse, a cruel irony, a perfect coach, forgotten in his own triumph. But to Auburn, he was still king. 6 straight years beating Alabama, the arch-rival, a streak unmatched in history. On Iron Bowl nights, he walked onto the field amid roaring crowds, rain falling, grass wet, lights shining on his face, cold, focused, alone. The state of Alabama trembled with pride. The nation saw Auburn as a symbol of discipline and ambition, but glory, as always in his life, came with loneliness. While players were celebrated, his name sank under harsh headlines. Tuberville is outdated. Auburn needs new fire. Those who once praised him turned away. The media compared him to bold young coaches, calling him a conservative who won't change. Internal meetings became covert battlegrounds, administrators, donors, advisors, all meddling in his decisions. He began to feel betrayed, not by losses, but by those who'd promised loyalty. One night, after a tense meeting, he returned to Jordan-Hare alone. The lights were off, only moonlight spread across the grass. He sat in the front row, flipping through his old notebook that had followed him through the years. On the last page, he wrote, I taught them how to win, but not necessarily how to stay loyal. The wind blew through the flags, Auburn's banner trembling, the faint clink of metal sounding like a farewell. As his tenure neared its end, the void around him grew. Press conferences lost their laughter. Pressure, doubt, and the media's cold stares wore down his mind bit by bit. Though he still won games, he felt himself losing an invisible war against time, change, and the shadow he'd created. In late 2008, after an unusual string of losses, whispers spread across Auburn. Coach Tubbs is leaving. One December evening, no press conference, no farewell, he submitted his resignation. No complaints, no tears. He packed a few items in a cardboard box, a whistle, his notebook, and a photo of the 2004 team. Before leaving, he glanced back at the scoreboard, where 13-0 remained etched in memory, and whispered, "We did our best, boys." The winter wind howled through the empty stands, carrying his figure into the dim yellow light of the corridor. No fanfare, no send-off. But those who played under him remembered the steady gaze, the low voice, the hand on their shoulder when they fell. Auburn moved on with new coaches, new seasons, while Tommy Tuberville vanished from the stage like a retired general needing no medals. The press called him outdated, but to his former players, he remained the man who taught them the greatest lesson. Asterisk. Winning isn't about scoring points. Winning is keeping your pride unbroken. Asterisk. That final night at Auburn, he drove through the campus gates, the rearview mirror reflecting the stadium lights fading into the distance. In his heart was a strange calm, tinged with the sorrow of a man who knew his time was over. But beneath that pain, a small flame still burned the fire of faith, that sometimes the greatest thing a man can do is walk away in silence, when the world no longer listens, but his heart still beats for what he loves. After leaving Auburn, Tommy Tuberville vanished from the college football map like a ghost. For 2 years, he lived quietly in Auburn, fishing, teaching a few freelance coaching classes, occasionally invited to ceremonies where people spoke of him as a fond memory. But deep inside, he knew he couldn't rest. A coach's heart couldn't bear the stillness. In 2010, he returned Texas Tech, opened its arms, offering a chance to start anew. Once again, he stepped onto the practice field, heard the whistle, felt the wet grass underfoot, but the past clung to him like an unshakable shadow. Every time he walked onto the field, fans shouted, "Auburn!" a reminder that he was forever the man from before. He tried to stay composed, but under the stadium lights, his eyes carried the weariness of someone who'd borne too many victories. In 2012, during a tense game against Kansas, pressure and frustration erupted. In a moment of lost control, he yanked the headset off an assistant beside him, an act that unintentionally became a symbol of years of pent-up anger. Cameras caught it all, and the clip spread across America within hours. The press called him the hot-tempered old man, a coach past his prime. A flood of vicious comments followed. Tuberville no longer knows how to teach, only how to punish. 3 days later, he appeared on television, voice trembling. "I lost my temper. I was wrong." The apology was so sincere that the host fell silent. But the pain didn't come from the mistake, it came from being seen as a relic, a symbol of a bygone era. In 2013, he left Texas Tech for Cincinnati, a small, uncelebrated team with no pressure and no spotlight. The gym was cold, the stands empty, the media indifferent. He arrived at his first press conference with a forced smile, saying, "I just want to coach again." But deep down, he knew this wasn't a beginning. It was an epilogue. College football had changed. Players were younger, the market fiercer, the fans less patient. He tried to adapt, to smile, to be the Coach Tubbs of old. But inside, a void was growing. Every morning, he arrived at the field first, turned on the lights, walked the empty stands, wondering if anyone still remembered him. Some nights, he sat in his office, looking out at the grass, hearing the rain fall, the flickering lights evoking the distant Sugar Bowl night. The feeling was both sweet and painful, like hearing the old song of his own life. He wrote in his journal, "Football once saved me from loneliness. Now it reminds me I'm growing old." In 2016, Cincinnati fell into crisis. The team lost 8 games. The stands grew sparse. Calls for his firing echoed everywhere. At the final press conference of the season, he sat quietly, eyes downcast, then softly said, "No one leaves the field because they lose. They leave when their heart grows tired." That quote spread across America, ringing like a farewell. He submitted his resignation, seeking no compensation, harboring no bitterness, leaving silently like a soldier knowing when to retreat. The first months of retirement were an endless void. No practice schedules, no players to yell at, no crowds to cheer. He stayed up late each night, watching old game tapes. Once, he played the 2004 Auburn comeback, the legendary turnaround. As the crowd's roar blared through the speakers, tears fell. "I don't remember the game," he told an old friend who called to check in. "I just remember the boys hugging in the rain." Now, in his Auburn home, dusty team photos line the walls. His whistle hangs quietly by the doorframe. He speaks little, rarely recounts the past. Each morning, he steps onto the porch, pours a cup of coffee, watches the sun rise behind the trees, his eyes distant. Occasionally, former players call, addressing him as "Coach," and he smiles, voice hoarse, replying, "You still fighting out there?" His career, once written in light now, lingers only in memory. But in that loneliness, there's something beautiful. He holds no grudges, casts no blame. He understands that life, like a season, has quarters you can't win. What matters is walking off the field with your head held high. And in that quiet, Tommy Tuberville, once hailed as a legend, found something he'd never had: a fragile peace between the two whistles, the start and the end. When the silent days of retirement began to suffocate him, Tommy Tuberville did the unthinkable. He returned to the battlefield, not the field, but politics. In 2020, amid a divided America, he announced his run for Alabama's U.S. Senate seat. "No promises, just plans," he said at his campaign launch, still with that gravelly voice and the straightforward demeanor of an old coach. His campaign poster showed a familiar face: white dress shirt, a hesitant but sincere smile, and a simple slogan times "Coach for Alabama." Asterisk. To the people, he was a trustworthy figure, a man who'd led young men into athletic battles and taught them discipline, honor, and faith, and they believed in him. The election ended in a resounding victory. Tommy Tuberville became a U.S. Senator at 66. On swearing-in day, he wore a deep blue suit, red tie, his hand trembling slightly as it rested on his father's old Bible. As he recited the oath of allegiance, he saw in his mind the image of the old soldier Charles R. Tuberville, Jr., standing silently in memory, eyes stern yet proud. "A real man isn't afraid to be hated." His father's words echoed like wind through the cold marble halls of Congress. But within weeks, Tommy realized Washington wasn't Auburn. Here, victory wasn't measured by scores, but by votes, allies, and handshakes laced with knives. His early days in the Senate were a series of relentless clashes. He arrived at meetings on time, took meticulous notes, spoke in the dry tone of a man more accustomed to locker rooms than podiums. Reporters sneered. The rural coach teaching politicians how to play ball. Veteran senators eyed him with a mix of curiosity and disdain. They called him the coach, part taunt, part label, to keep him on the sidelines. But Tuberville didn't retort. He stayed silent, as he had during his early years in Miami. He worked diligently, reading documents late into the night, listening to debates on defense, agriculture, budgets. He scribbled dozens of notes about the nation's game plan, not for a team, but for issues needing discipline and strategy. He believed America, like a football team, needed leadership grounded in discipline and faith, not empty promises. But Washington didn't run on faith. Every word had a price, every vote an agenda. In closed-door meetings, he sat through power-brokering sessions where honor was traded for calculation. One evening, after a grueling hearing, he wandered alone down marble stairs, lights casting shadows on his lined face. "This is a colder field than football," he thought, "where no one plays for the team, only for themselves." The media gave him no peace. Snide articles appeared. Tommy Tuberville, yet to master Senate protocol. Small-town coach lost in the political maze. He read them all, didn't react, but each word cut into his pride. In meetings, he kept a calm face, but inside was a heavy rain. Back in his office, he stared out the window, the Capitol's glow reflecting in his tired eyes. From home, Suzanne and their 2 sons called to encourage him. They knew their father was lonely. "Dad, just do what you believe," Tucker said over the phone. "No matter what they say, we believe in you." He smiled, voice catching, "I'm fine, just learning to coach a team with no head coach." But the more he believed, the more isolated he became. Faith, in politics, was a double-edged sword. It made him strong and made others wary. Colleagues called him stubborn. The media dubbed him a rock. But he only did what he thought was right. defending veterans, speaking for workers, opposing policies he deemed misguided. Some nights, he sat alone in his office, watching flags whip in the rain outside, remembering Auburn. He recalled the sound of players' cleats on the floor, the cheers, the cold wind through the stands. There, he'd been a commander. Here, he was just a pawn on a vast board. Maybe, he told himself, a man used to noise will always feel lost when there's only silence. He wrote in his journal, his handwriting shaky, asterisk, faith is the most beautiful thing and the thing that hurts us most. Asterisk. He didn't know those words would soon become a prophecy, for soon, that steadfast, unyielding, honest faith would lead him into the greatest storm of his life, a game with no overtime, no cheering crowd, just darkness, conscience, and loneliness. In 2023, Washington entered its tensest winter in years, and at the storm's center was a silver-haired man with the unmistakable Southern drawl, Tommy Tuberville. He didn't mean to spark a crisis, but it began when he opposed a new Defense Department policy allowing service members financial support to travel for abortions. To him, it was a matter of morals, of faith. "I can't stay silent," he said. "We can't use taxpayer money for that." And so, with a solitary decision, he placed a hold blocking over 400 military promotions. A legal move, but one few dared to make. At first, he thought it would be a short-term tactic to force dialogue. But weeks turned into months, and the storm grew. The press branded him the defense obstructor. Colleagues turned away. Many who once called him coach now avoided him in hallways. The media painted him as a stubborn, heartless conservative, blind to the thousands of military families waiting. Night after night, his face filled screens, aged, weary, voice firm, framed by mocking headlines, asterisk, Tuberville's blockade weakens the Pentagon, asterisk, loneliness. The word had never carried such weight. He arrived at the office earlier, left later, dodging cameras. Sometimes, only his desk lamp lit his haggard face. Each evening, as staff left, he stayed, reading letters sent to him. Some supported him, some cursed him, some wrote pages to say, "You're destroying our military." One letter he'd never forget from a soldier's mother in Kentucky. Her simple, scrawled words, asterisk, "I don't know if you're right or wrong. I just want my son to come home." Asterisk. He read it over and over, then silently wept the first time in years. Isolation wasn't just a feeling, it was the air he breathed. In the Senate, cold stares surrounded him. When he spoke, some left their seats. Those who once called him friend passed without a nod. Even an old party ally avoided his gaze, fearing guilt by association. In interviews, he kept his steady tone. "I'm doing what I believe." But behind the calm were sleepless nights, a silent battle with his own conscience. Back in Auburn, Suzanne and their sons followed every headline. Once Tucker called, voice heavy, "Dad, they're attacking you." Tommy gave a faint smile. "I've been booed by thousands, son, remember? But the worst pain is believing you're right and still hurting others." His voice broke at the end. By October, pressure from within and outside his party peaked. The defense secretary warned generals couldn't be promoted, units had to reshuffle. TV screens showed soldiers awaiting promotions. "Politics is hurting those in uniform," one anchor said, and Tommy's face appeared as the symbol of blame. One evening, after a 4-hour closed-door meeting, Tommy sat in an empty room. On his desk lay the old Bible and his father's faded military photo. He touched them, whispering as if confessing, "I just wanted to do right, but maybe I forgot that right and good aren't always the same." Outside, the first snow began to fall. In December 2023, he ended the hold. His voice, in a live interview, was tired but calm. "I acted on faith, but I've learned faith must also listen." The room fell silent. No applause, no celebration. But a young reporter later wrote on social media, asterisk, "He may have been wrong in how he did it, But today, he was right in how he ended it. Asterisk. That night, as others left, he stayed in his office. Outside, the Capitol glowed in the snowy night. He donned his coat, walked out, pacing the white stone halls, his footsteps echoing in silence. No one called his name, no one snapped photos. Only the wind and snowflakes settled on his coat. His shoes left a long trail in the snow, glinting under streetlights. At the step's end, he paused, looked up at the gray sky, and whispered, "Dad, I tried." In that bone-chilling moment, Tommy Tuberville's image was small but proud, a lonely man leaving the political battlefield, as he'd once left the football field. No victory, no medals, only silence. But in that silence, one thing lived on: the courage to believe, even when faith is what hurts most. In 2025, spring in Auburn arrived late, bringing gentle breezes and the scent of damp, fresh grass. In a red brick house on a quiet street near the university, Tommy Tuberville woke at 5 a.m., as he had for decades. He no longer went to Congress daily, no longer wore a blue suit, or answered reporters. Now, his routine was simple, almost serene. A few stretches on the porch, a strong black coffee, then a slow drive to the small field behind the church to coach football to disabled kids. His eyes, dimmed by age, and his back, aching with each bend, didn't stop him. When he threw the first ball of the morning, he smiled the smile of a man accustomed to pain and who'd learned to turn it into strength. The kids called him Coach Tommy, their voices slurred but eager. He taught them how to catch, how to fall without fear, and most importantly, how to get back up. "Winning isn't on the scoreboard," he said, his voice rough like wind through leaves. "It's in daring to try again." Watching them run, he saw himself the Camden boy who fell, who sought a nod of approval, and who learned you don't need someone to say proud as long as you don't quit. In the afternoons, he drove to the Auburn Veterans Home, where old soldiers sat on wooden benches overlooking the garden. He walked slowly, shook each hand, asked about their families, listened to stories of old wounds that ached in cold weather. On the hallway wall, a framed photo of his father, Charles Tuberville Jr., hung behind glass. He paused, touched it, and whispered, "I understand now, Dad. Your silence wasn't coldness. It was how you bore your pain." Only now did he realize his father left him not just discipline, but a legacy, the courage to live by faith, even when misunderstood, even at a cost. His Auburn home was a small museum of memories. On the wall hung a photo of the 2004 Auburn team hoisting the SEC trophy, next to a black and white image of his father in World War II uniform. At sunset, the two photos reflected each other, as if two generations gazed across time. On his desk lay a draft of his will. Most of his estate would fund education for poor students and support for veterans. Signing it, he chuckled softly. Money runs out, but values endure. One summer afternoon, his sons Tucker and Troy returned from New York and Texas. The three sat on the porch, wind rustling through old oak trees. Tucker brought an old football, grinning. "Dad, I bet you can still throw straight." Tommy stood, joints creaking, but took the ball and tossed it lightly. It didn't go far, but the arc was perfect. They laughed, then headed to the backyard field. After a few throws, he grew dizzy, stumbled, and fell onto the grass. His sons rushed over, alarmed, but he burst out laughing, sweat beading. "Not done yet. As long as I'm breathing, I'm coaching." That moment was simple but more beautiful than any glory he'd known. The sky glowed golden, laughter echoed in the dusk, and in his son's eyes he saw what he'd sought all his life, genuine pride, unspoken. He realized every victory, every loss, every fall had led to this: being a father, a coach, at peace with those he loved. At night, he sat by the window, writing final lines in his worn coaching notebook. From Camden's shadows to Washington's light, I didn't win for glory, but because I never stopped getting up. The wind flipped the page, making it tremble like a heartbeat. He closed his eyes, breathing steady, no longer surrounded by noise or pressure, only the hum of crickets and the warmth of his memory-filled home. Tomorrow, he'd return to the field, coach the kids, maybe stumble again, but that was fine. For Tommy Tuberville, life was never a straight path. It was a long game, where the only thing to hold on to was the courage to keep going, through pain, through loneliness. And if you've ever had a coach who believed in you more than you did, leave a like. The world still needs people like Tommy Tuberville, those who coach with heart and live with scars. Perhaps the deepest sorrow in Tommy Tuberville's story lies not in failure, but in the victories that tasted faintly of loneliness. The undefeated 2004 season, 13-0, SEC champions, Sugar Bowl victors, a near-perfect team yet excluded from the BCS championship. It was the first scratch on his belief that doing right earns recognition. 6 straight years toppling Alabama, then leaving Auburn in 2008, no press conference, only a whisper to the scoreboard. "We did our best, boys." That pain grew at Texas Tech, when he lost control, yanked the headset, and went on TV to say, "I lost my temper. I was wrong." A rare public apology, showing the courage to admit fault. In Cincinnati, 2016, he stepped away with a heart-touching line. "No one leaves the field because they lose. They leave when their heart grows tired." Entering politics, he learned Washington's coldness. In 2023, holding military promotions over his beliefs, he faced a storm of criticism, reading letters from soldiers' families, one from a mother, "I don't know if you're right or wrong. I just want my son to come home," brought him to tears. Ending the hold in December with, "I acted on faith, but I learned faith must also listen." He showed power is only worthy when tempered. In 2025, back aching, eyes dim, he still coached disabled kids, visited veterans, drafted a will for education and veterans' funds. Falling on the grass with Tucker and Troy, he laughed. "Not done yet. As long as I'm breathing, I'm coaching." To Americans, the lesson is clear. True success isn't measured by trophies or seats of power, but by how many times you rise. Conscience isn't just steadfast faith, but daring to listen when the vulnerable speak. Legacy isn't wealth left behind, but the people you lift: children, veterans, your community. If Coach Tuberville's story makes you believe resilience and compassion can coexist in one person, hit subscribe to keep sharing these human journeys. Thank you for listening. See you in the next video, where we honor those who lived, fell, but never stopped rising.